Hey everyone, it's Will here from Singletrack magazine and singletrackworld.com, and I've got a bike here that I want to talk to you about. This is brand new for 2019. This is the Scott Ransom. Now, I've been riding this bike for the past month or so, and I'm going to be taking you through what it's like to ride, some of the features on the frame design, suspension, geometry, and how that all translates onto the trail. But first we'll just go through the basics. Now of course the Ransom name has been in the Scott lineup before. The original model was released, I think it was first announced in around 2005, and at the time it was a really groundbreaking bike. Quite a genre-bending bike. It had 165mm of rear travel, a very high-tech carbon fibre frame, very lightweight as well, and a handlebar remote that allowed you to adjust the travel on the rear suspension. Now the Ransom hung around for a few years, but then it gave way to the Genius LT. That bike had a good run, again, for about 6 years or so, but it disappeared from the lineup last year mysteriously, and this is the reason why. It's because Scott is bringing back the Ransom. Now, compared to the Genius LT, the new Ransom is completely different. It's got a new frame, new suspension design. It shares very little in common with the previous Genius LT. This shares a lot more in common with the new Genius. In fact, the overall shape is very similar. But let's take you through some of the basic numbers. This bike has 170mm of travel front and rear. It is a very big bike. This model here is the Ransom 900 tuned, and it comes with 29-inch wheels. Not just any 29-inch wheels though, these are wrapped with 2.6-inch wide Maxxis Minion DHF tyres. That's a lot of tyre and a lot of suspension, so a very, very big bike. This is a full carbon fibre frame, save for that alloy rocker link in the middle. And the claim frame weight on this, with the rear shock and hardware, is just 2,650 grams, 2.65 kilos. So it's very, very lightweight, especially when you consider it has that much travel. There will be other models available. Scott will be offering the Ransom with an alloy frame, and the range will kick off just under $3,000 for the Ransom 930. It'll also be available with 27.5 plus wheels, and every Ransom frame has the ability to run 29-inch or 27.5-inch plus wheels. There's a small chip in the upper shock mount here, and all you do is flip that around 180 degrees and you've got high and low positions. High is for running the smaller 27.5-inch wheels, and low is for running the 29-inch wheels like we have here. Right, so I'm going to talk about the suspension on this bike because it is a rather defining feature of the Ransom ever since the original. So we have the TWINLOC handlebar remote, and this offers 3 distinct suspension settings. Now this remote does adjust the fork and the rear shock simultaneously. You've got descend, which is basically full open, full travel, front and rear. Then you've got the middle traction control position. Now in that middle position, the fork compression is firmed up a bit, but the rear shock has a very clever feature inside, which is when you engage that traction control mode, part of the volume of the air shock is closed off. And that shrinks the air volume inside the air canister, and it makes the shock really progressive. In fact, it makes it so progressive that it limits the rear travel from 170 to 120mm of travel. It also makes the bike feel a lot more efficient, and the other thing that it does is it changes the dynamic geometry of the bike. It lifts the ride height, it lifts the bottom bracket, steepens the head angle, steepens the seat angle, and that's really good for climbing. Scott actually says that this is even more noticeable the steeper the climb gets. So if you're in traction control position, those angles get about 1.5 degrees steeper. That's the head angle and the seat angle compared to riding in the descend mode. So it's a really useful tool for climbing. The third position with that handlebar remote is a full lockout front and rear. Be able to turn this bike into basically a fully rigid mountain bike at the flick of a button is really useful for long tarmac climbs, which I've been doing a lot the past month in the Alps and around Lake Garda and places like Punta Ala as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the componentry on this bike just quickly. This is the top of the range model. It's the 900 tune, so it is quite the blingy package on here. We've got Fox KASHIMA suspension front and rear. We've got a KASHIMA coded transfer dropper post. This has 150mm of travel on this one. SRAM X01 Eagle drivetrain, very, very schmick. We've got a nice lightweight upper guide over the chainring there just to keep that in check, and I haven't dropped a chain in the month that I've been riding this on some pretty rough and rocky trails. Brakes come from SRAM as well. These are the code RSC stoppers, very powerful 4-piston brakes, really nice modulation, really nice lever feel as well, and a really good solid bike point too. The wheels on this bike come from SYNCROS. These are new, these are called the REVELSTOKE 1.5 wheels. They have a 30mm internal rim width, and that's there to support a 2.4 to a 2.6 inch wide tyre. Really nice buzzy free hub mechanism. This has 78 engagement points on the rear hub. Steel cartridge bearings, straight pull hubs, and straight pull spokes. And these weigh just a little over 2 kilos for the whole set. Possibly the most striking feature on this bike is, of course, this one-piece carbon fibre handlebar. This comes from Singcross, and it's called the Hickson ICSL. Now, I've ridden this bar on the Genius 900 tune. This handlebar is pretty similar, but it's a bit wider, 780mm. It's also got more rise, 20mm rise on this one. It's very light, being the one-piece carbon fibre, but it's got a really nice shape to it, really good sweep, and it's also got really nice vibration damping as well, so quite a comfortable bar to ride. So how does this bike ride? Well, I will say that for 170mm of travel, the Ransom climbs really, really well. It's not really the reason you buy a bike with this much travel, but this bike does go uphill very, very efficiently, particularly when things get technical. Having that middle traction control position just lifts the bike up, gives you more pedal clearance, so you're less likely to stall, smash rocks and roots. You've got more space underneath the bottom bracket to keep pedaling, keep charging up steep technical trails. Even in that middle traction control position, the rear shock stays active, so it's not a compression adjustment, it's just an air spring adjustment. So you do get less travel, but the suspension's still active, and that gives you good traction combined with these big 2.6 inch Maxxis tires. This thing will climb up a lot of stuff that you wouldn't think you'd be able to climb up on a bike with 170mm of travel. Once you get to the top, of course, that's when you realize why this bike has that much travel. It charges down descents, very, very stable, very plush suspension design. The Fox fork and rear shock are really nicely balanced, so they're very in tune with each other. It doesn't feel like one's working harder than the other. On the note of the fork, Scott has actually spec'd the Ransom with a shorter 44mm offset. That's compared to 51mm offset that comes on the Genius. Now, that short offset does increase trail. Combined with a 64.5 degree head angle, which is very, very slack, this bike is very steady, very planted on the front. You do need to put a little bit more weight on the grips because it is quite slack, so it does require a little bit more commitment than, say, riding the Genius. But once you learn to trust this bike and how much traction there is available in those big Maxxis Minion tires, you do end up putting more weight onto the front wheel, getting that traction, and keeping the bike moving through the turns. Speaking of turns, it's really nimble. I know that sounds like an oxymoron for a bike that's this big with this much travel, but it's got really good standover height. With the seat post slammed out of the way, with that nice low drop top tube, you can really move around on this bike quite easily. It's got a short back end too. 438mm is the rear center length, and that gives it loads of nimbleness and flickability for a bike with this much travel. So climbing and cornering, this bike does really, really well, regardless of how much travel it has. So I would say that defines the Ransom. This is, of course, a capable bike on the descents and in the rough stuff and on technical steep terrain. Yeah, of course, it's going to go down that stuff really well. But because it climbs so well and because it handles so well on kind of more mellow, twisty single track, it's a really good all-rounder. You wouldn't necessarily buy this bike just for hitting up the bike park and just shuttling downhill laps. It's so much more than that. This is a bike for self-shuttling, for going up 1 to 2 hour long climbs high up into the mountains to access the really rough, natural, technical single track. And that's exactly what this bike relishes in doing. So really, really impressed with this bike. Now, if you want to read the full review and get the full tech rundown on all that's going on with the 2019 Scott Ransom, jump on singletrackworld.com. You'll be able to see the full news story on the bike and my first ride review, spending the last month on this, on some fantastic trails through Austria and Italy as well. My name's Will, thank you for watching, and if you've got any questions about this bike and my experience with it, drop them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Thanks guys, Turu.